Welcome to Therapy in the Great Outdoors, the podcast where we explore the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy of all kinds. If you're an outdoor-loving pediatric practitioner in the fields of occupational, physical, or speech therapy, social work, or mental health, this podcast will help you start and grow a successful nature-based practice or program. I am the ever honest, always 100% real, you'll hear it all on this podcast, Dr. Laura Park Figueroa. I'm a pediatric OT with over 20 years of experience, and I run a thriving nature-based practice with profitable locations in 2 different states and multi-six figures in revenue. I also host the free online community at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com to help you pursue your nature-based therapy dreams too. Are you ready to take action on those dreams? Let's jump in. Welcome back to Therapy in the Great Outdoors. Today we're going to talk about all things sensory, which is the name of Jessica and Rachel's podcast, because Rachel Harrington and Jessica Hill are here. We're going to talk about how nature can support regulation of the nervous system, how you can incorporate outdoor activities into a sensory diet for your clients, as well as some ways to incorporate primitive reflex integration activities into outdoor sessions, because reflex integration seems all the rage right now. So we're going to talk about that as well. So if you don't already know this dynamic duo, they are truly a dynamic duo. They are Harkla's in-house certified OT assistants and certified primitive reflex clinical specialists. Harkla is a company that provides products, courses, and community for sensory autism and ADHD families. So Rachel and Jessica have been working with kids for over 9 years in outpatient settings, and they are truly geniuses at creating really easy to digest, actionable content that families and therapists can use. So before we hit record here, I was saying, you guys just do such a good job of meeting the needs of therapists, but also making it in language that families can understand. And it's just amazing. And again, their podcast is All Things Sensory. Y'all probably already know about that if you're listening to this podcast, but if you don't, please go over and listen. It is full of tons of great information for any pediatric therapist. So welcome, Rachel and Jessica. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much.
What an intro. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so excited. So one thing we touched on, again, before hitting record, is that this podcast is for pediatric therapists in general who want to take their work outdoors with children. So I think I want to start out with, because you guys are the experts here on sensory processing and all things self-regulations, can we do a quick overview of sensory processing for like our non-OT listeners? Because we know all of our OT friends went to graduate school and know this, but can you just tell us what sensory processing is?
Sensory processing. It's one of the coolest things. I'm obsessed with it. Jessica, we're just absolutely obsessed with it. If you think about it, we all have sensory systems. We're all sensory beings, and we all have 8 senses. So you think about the normal 5 that we all learned in elementary school, and then you have 3 hidden senses that are actually, in my opinion, some of the most important for regulation. You have your sense of proprioception, which is your body awareness, where your body is in space, and it really ties into that self-regulation component. Then you have your vestibular system, which is your sense of movement. You have receptors in your inner ear that tells you where you are, head position changes, and things like that. And then your interoceptive system, which honestly, this wasn't even taught to us in school. That's how quickly things change, right? And this is where what's happening inside of your body. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Do you have to go to the bathroom? Are you sick? Are you tired? How's your emotions? And it connects into your emotional regulation, your emotional intelligence too.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at sensory processing, all 8 of our senses have to be working efficiently 24/7 in order for us to feel calm, regulated, for us to be able to access the higher level cognitive parts of our brain in order to do the things we need to do throughout our day. And so that's where occupational therapy comes in, because that's our job, is to help our clients feel successful and do things that they want to do every day. And if their sensory system is dysregulated, if their sensory needs are not being met, or if they're receiving too much sensory input and they're overstimulated, they're going to be in a state of fight or flight. They're going to be dysregulated, and it's going to negatively impact their ability to get through their day.
Yeah, and I love how you guys explain it, and I agree that when I went to OT school 25 years ago, so my 30-year high school reunion is this summer, and I can't believe it. I feel like I'm 20, so I don't know.
That's how I aged past 25.
But when I was in school, we learned the seven. It's like the seven senses, and we thought we were so great because we knew of proprioceptive and vestibular, but that interoception piece, I know that's been in recent years, like we're starting to think more about that. And it just makes so much sense because it's like when you're anxious, your stomach hurts. Like it's inside of you. It's something that you actually, it's so tied in how our inner body feels to our emotional states. Love it. Okay. Thank you for the little overview. And let's dive in a little bit into along those lines. I know we want to talk about the outdoors and activities outdoors, incorporating them into a sensory diet. And so I know our OTs are all familiar with that phrase, but let's have you guys define what a sensory diet is too, because I know that's something we're going to get into in a little bit.
Yeah, I think the term sensory diet, some people love it, some people don't necessarily love it. It's what we're familiar with. It makes sense in our brains, and so that's what we like to teach. But you could call it a sensory
Yeah.
lifestyle, a sensory plan, but really it's a combination of specific sensory activities in a specific order in order to achieve a desired appropriate adaptive response or an appropriate arousal level. So for a kiddo who is
Yeah.
sensory seeking and they're bouncing off the walls, they're all over the place, touching and jumping and eating and doing all the things, we want to make sure that we're helping them meet their threshold, give them what they're seeking, and then organize their nervous system. Or for a kiddo who is
Yeah.
avoidant and sensory sensitive, we want to make sure that we're finding that balance of still giving them what they need, but also organizing their highly sensitive sensory system with things like proprioception.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we have terms defined, let's talk about nature and the outdoors. So let's think about, I know there's so many directions we could go. I wonder if you guys could talk with us maybe a little bit about, do you think that, because you work with a lot of like pediatric therapists that are, I would think, mostly working in clinics or homes or traditional settings that we would work in as pediatric therapists. Are you seeing people start to incorporate more outdoor stuff into sensory diets? Is this something that is uncommon? Is it common? What are you guys seeing in the world out there with the people you interact with?
I think in the clinic setting, we are often trying to get outside with our clients during our sessions. We just recently, the clinic that I work in, we just recently moved into a bigger building, and our main treatment area has big windows throughout the whole room. So we're getting a lot of that natural light in during our treatment sessions, which is, and then as therapists and as the weather's getting nicer, we are trying to get outside more. Let's take the chalk out and go draw on the sidewalk. Let's take some messy play and do the messy play outside instead of on the hard floor. Let's do some gardening activities. I'm thankful that I work in a place where the therapists are along that same line of let's get outside with our clients as much as possible. I don't know if it's necessarily increasing or if it's less popular in other areas. I know that our area here in Idaho, we have several clinics and programs that work with children and families to be outdoors more often.
Yeah. And I think the only thing I'll
Yeah.
add is that when we are helping to educate or teach about sensory diets and sensory diet activities, generally in every sensory diet that we create or we teach about, it's wake up in the morning and in your morning sensory diet, go outside, get the sunlight, take your sunglasses off, walk barefoot in the grass. After school sensory diet, go climb a tree, ride a bike, dig a hole, play in the sandbox. So we try to incorporate teaching other therapists how to add those nature components into sensory diets for their clients because as obviously this is a nature podcast, the benefits are just huge. And
Yeah.
if we could have every session be outside, it would be game changing, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
too, it's very telling if we as clinicians can give these recommendations to the families and they actually try it and they come back later and they tell us, my child was so happy for an hour being outside. I thought it was going to be so hard. But once we got outside and we went on a walk or we went to the park or we did this or that outside, they were just so happy and regulated. I can't believe how
Yeah.
amazing it was. But it's once they see the proof, then they're able to
Hmm.
understand why it's important and be able to implement it a little bit more.
Yeah, it feels so to me logical common sense, right? It feels, is what we're saying really that
I
innovative to
know.
just get kids outside? Yes, actually it is.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, but I do think that parents sometimes, there's a really wonderful Instagram account, which I would recommend to anyone listening to this podcast would probably be interested in it. And you guys might too. It's called My Outdoorsy Mom.
Oh,
And she's just become a friend on Instagram. We have Instagram friends nowadays. And she's a young mom who has, I think, 2 or 3 kids. And her whole account is about like how she gets outdoors with them. And one of the things that she talks about is at first it was really hard. It was like to figure out what
logistics.
to do with them, right? So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. How can we as therapists help parents get the kids outdoors and give them things to do outdoors with their kids? So, what types of things would you guys maybe be recommending as part of a sensory diet? Let's get into some of like the nuts and bolts of things that therapists could maybe recommend.
The first one that I always recommend is just go for a walk around the block. Like it doesn't have to be complex, it doesn't have to be for a long period of time. Depending on where you live, you might have to go a little bit farther. You might have access to a park, but you don't even have to go to the park. You could just go for a walk around the block and talk about the different things that you see. What flowers do you see?
Yeah.
What plants do you see? Or if your child's non speaking, or if they're very young, maybe you are doing all of the talking and the pointing. Or maybe it's a quiet walk. You don't even have to talk. You can
Those are
just
my
walk.
favorite.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. You don't even have to talk. Maybe it's just a quiet walk and you don't even necessarily engage in a lot of conversation. You're just going on a
Absolutely.
walk.
Yeah, and I'll add too that if you can have it be child led, like for me, I'm in the early intervention type age range with my own personal kiddos that I have to work
Uh-huh.
with every day. But let it be child led, follow their lead. They want to go this way. If they want to climb on the rocks, let them climb on the rocks. If they want to jump off of the grass, if they want to log roll down the hill, let them log roll, let them explore and go at their pace. Because I feel like so often in a traditional clinic setting or just life in general, it's always go, you're on my time, we're late, we're rushing. But when you're outside, take that opportunity to slow down and follow their lead and go at their pace. And if they want to pick up 47 rocks and put them in their pockets, check them
Let
out,
them.
count them,
Yeah.
talk about the sizes. So it's just focus on letting it be child led and meet your child or meet your client wherever they're at their ability.
And I love that recommendation. And I tell my clients this all the time that your child might be dysregulated because they feel like they have no control over their day, over their life, because they
Yeah.
are being told what to do all the time by all of these adults in their life. So if the outdoor time every day, the going on the walk, going to the park, or even just going to the backyard, if that is within their control and they're showing you how to do something and you are, instead of giving them instructions of what to do, you're just doing what they're doing, you're following their lead, all of a sudden they have a
Yeah.
sense of autonomy and a sense of control over their life, and they're going to be
Yeah.
regulated because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading a book. I'm looking around because I thought it was sitting right here, but I'm reading a book called Goal Setting and Motivation in Therapy or something like that. It was recommended at a physical therapy conference that I spoke at, and I just was connected with someone. They showed it to me, and I was like, I need to get that. And one of the things it talks about in the book is self-determination theory. And I don't know, I'm totally speaking off the cuff. I don't know if I'm going to remember all of it, but it was the 3 components that a person needs to be self-motivated to do something were, it's A, R, and C. It's autonomy, relatedness and competence, I think, were the three. So it's basically that autonomy piece is what our kids like. It just made me think of that when you were saying the child is controlled all the time. And that's a large part of what a lot of nature-based therapists are seeking to give back to kids in our therapy sessions is this sense of you have autonomy here. Not the whole time. We do make sure that we
Yeah.
have some structure, right? But that idea of them being autonomous and being able to make the choices, so much of kids' lives are just structured by adults. And it's great for parents too. I love that suggestion too for parents because I think a lot of times as therapists, we can get stuck in a lot of the technical stuff and we forget that everything goes back again, self-determination theory, that relatedness piece of that co-regulation with the child and just connecting with them is so powerful. That's like ultimately the foundation of all sensory regulation, I think, is that connectedness to their caregiver, right? Or to the parent. So I love that.
Yep. And anytime your child gets to lead the activity, they are connecting with you in a whole new way. And they feel it builds that trust. When you can ask
Yeah.
the child questions and engage in play how they want to play, then you're building trust with them.
Yeah. And that is very hard for parents and sometimes therapists to do.
Yes, it is.
Because I remember when my kids were young, we'd go on hikes, and my husband is not a nature person. I've been thinking about doing a whole podcast just on this. Hey, you can still love nature even if your partner. I get so depressed when I see a lot of the, I won't name anyone, but like a lot of the content online is like, we're outdoorsy, our whole family goes. And I'm like, yeah, outdoorsy, but my whole family does not like the outdoors. So what do we do with that? That's okay. It's okay. You can be yourself and you can still get your kids outdoors even when your partner is not like fully on board. But I used to joke that I digress, but he used to be like, you guys get down from there. You guys be careful. You guys, and I'm like, stop. Just let them be. Like, let them be. Like, they're not hurting any animal. The tree's going to be fine if they climb it. He just was wound up in nature.
Yeah.
So he's better now. He's mellowed with age. But yeah, I think it's a good example of how parents might struggle with that kind of child led, letting them
Exactly.
have that
I think
freedom.
it's so eye-opening for parents to have that self as to thinking about during their day. Like, how often am I telling my child to be careful or to get down or to stop doing that? If you keep track one day and you think about it, it'll probably be more than you realize. But I was just thinking one other activity I love to recommend is that risky play outside. Set up some old tires
Yeah.
and some wood and some climbing structures and rocks and let the kids build something and fall down and get hurt and get back up and problem solve. And that risky play is just something that kids aren't doing or getting access to as often anymore.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think as parents, and we're all parents, so we all understand this. We don't want our child to get hurt because it like
Right.
hurts us when our child is hurt. But if we can help teach them how to engage in risky play and feel confident in their bodies, and we can let them know, I'm here for you if you need help. I'm here for you if you do get hurt. Maybe I'm going to stand underneath you while you climb the tree, and I'm going to push my fear deep down and just tell my child, okay, you climb the tree until yeah, as you feel safe, and I'm here if you need me. And if they do fall, maybe you can catch them
Or break their fall.
or break their fall, right? But man, it just builds confidence in our children when we can allow them to do that risky play and then be there for them if they need us to co-regulate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, anything else that we should think about with like sensory diets and outdoors? I think it would be great if more clinic based and school based and home based therapists were thinking outdoors as far as what they could incorporate. But that maybe isn't our audience here. There might be some people that aren't doing nature based work yet. But are there any other ideas that come to mind?
Yeah, I was just thinking any therapist, whatever therapy world you're involved in, brainstorm and see if you can get outside for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the session. Can the first part of
Mhm.
your session be a walk around the building? The first 5 minutes be sitting outside in the sunshine or in
Doing
the
yoga
rain
or
or
something.
doing some yoga on the sidewalk? Even if it's raining, even if it's cold outside, it's still going to be beneficial.
Yeah, one of my therapists in my practice, she started this thing with her kids called Get Grounded Time.
Love.
So it's like the first 5 minutes of the session, right? And I think as therapists, we need to be okay with going a little slower
Yes.
in our sessions. Like you guys are high energy too. I can relate. Like it's good, right? It's good to be high energy with kids and it's good to bring high energy to the work you do. But for me as a therapist, when I'm with kids, I feel this pressure that I need to use every single minute to be therapeutic to the maximum value or whatever. And it's so good to, I think, for all of us to just step back and be like, actually, the same way that mindfulness is good for us or stillness is good for us, it can be really good for kids in our sessions to just take 5 minutes to notice things outside.
Absolutely.
It's just simple, but
And just to breathe fresh air. You think about the schedules today in our lifestyle, and it's you go from one square to another square, right? And how often are we stopping
Mhm.
outside and looking at the clouds and getting our heads into different positions and jumping and moving? And sometimes small little changes make such a big difference. And it just takes a moment of recognizing, oh my gosh, my client hasn't seen the sun today. Let's change that. Let's go outside. Let's walk.
Right.
Let's do our session outside. Let's go stomp in some rain puddles. Still
Mhm.
modulating sensory input that way. You still have to use the right amount of force and process the wind and the rain and everything. So there's so many opportunities. It just takes a little bit more effort to be creative in your approach.
Yes. Yeah. It does. It requires like thinking a little bit outside the
Mhm.
box, which is hilarious because we're talking about outside. I didn't mean that to be like a what do they call that? Yeah. We have to think outside the box. So let's pivot a little bit because I really do want to talk about primitive reflexes because this was just emerging as a thing similar to the interoception piece, right, of sensory integration. Primitive reflexes were becoming more mainstream, I guess, right around when I was starting, like maybe 10 years ago. Is that kind of what you guys think? I think it was maybe 10 years
Well,
ago or so.
we like got a really quick overview of them when we were in school, which was 10,
Yeah.
11 years ago.
Yeah.
But in our first job setting, we were at a pediatric clinic, and our mentor, the owner of the practice, taught us about like actually functionally addressing and testing for the primitive reflexes. And that's when it really clicked for us. Like, oh, okay, we learned about these in school. Now this is actually what they mean and how they impact a kiddo functionally.
I'm going to be totally honest. I have never tested a kid for primitive reflexes. I don't know much about it. I think I saw someone demo it at a conference I was at once. The only thing, so I'll share this little story with you guys and then you can give me your thoughts. I will love to hear what you think. Basically, when I heard about primitive reflexes, I think I got some like book or something on them. I don't even remember where it came from. I don't still have it, I don't think. And I tested my son, who's the youngest. He's 13 now. So he's probably 6 at the time. It was a while ago. And he is a very motorically advanced child. Like he's the youngest of 3, so he's just always watched them and toddled along after them and just always been very athletic and very physically active in a good way, like very coordinated. It's like his gift. And it was so interesting because I tested him for the ATNR and it looked like his ATNR was retained. And I was like, but you're totally functional, like in all ways. Like, how can it be that you have a retained ATNR if you are so functional? Like, you're swinging a baseball and hitting things at the age of 6. It made me like, I don't get it. And I guess maybe kids can have retained reflexes and it not affect them at all. But I'm wondering if you guys take that story and share what you will about primitive reflexes, because I'm so interested to hear. And maybe we should do a little orientation to primitive reflexes for anyone who
Yeah.
has not heard of them. We just dove into the conversation. But so, what are they and how can they impact function? And then maybe tell me what you think about kids still having them, but being relatively functional.
Well, first, I'm going to say that I have a very similar story to you that my son, who is 10 years old, also has a slightly retained ATNR. I haven't tested him recently. I think it's been about 2 years since I last tested him. But at the time, about 2 years ago, he had a slightly retained ATNR. He doesn't have any coordination issues. He's a great reader, writer at age level for all of those higher level cognitive activities, emotional regulation. He's doing well. So similar where I was like, oh, it's still there a little bit, but it's not impacting him functionally. And so
Right.
we'll talk about what they are and then circle back.
Let me add my personal
Okay.
anecdote to this as well, because it's a good opportunity to just have a review to think about as we're talking about it. My husband, I tested his as an adult, and he also had a slightly retained ATNR. And my reasoning for testing him was because he's always struggled with like left and right. So we'll be driving, he's like, turn left, and I'm like, you mean right? And he's like, yeah. But again, college athlete, functioning, doing well, but retained ATNR.
Slightly.
Slightly, yeah, exactly. Okay, so why don't you overview?
Okay, so what are primitive reflexes? We are all born with primitive reflexes. They are stereotypical movement that is directed from the brainstem, and they are designed to keep an infant alive and start the development process. So most people are familiar with the startle reflex, the Moro reflex, where baby is maybe sleeping and a sudden noise startles them and they jerk awake and then they cry. We're also often familiar with the ATNR reflex in infancy. It looks like the fencer pose where baby is laying on their back. They have their head turned and they go into this kind of fencer position with their arms. The main ones, or the Palmer grasp reflex. That one is where you put your finger in baby's palm and they grab onto you, or they grab onto your hair, and it's a death grip. Like you cannot get them to let go. Those are examples of a couple of primitive reflexes that are designed to alert their caregiver that they are in need of something or they might be in danger. That starts to develop the hand-eye coordination process, starts to develop the fine motor process with the hands. Like all of these primitive reflexes are designed to keep baby alive, but also start those developmental processes throughout infancy and toddlerhood. Now, primitive reflexes are designed to integrate into the body so that it makes way for higher level, more intentional coordinated movements, right? So primitive reflexes, because they're in the brainstem, we don't have control over them. They happen
Right.
with when something facilitates them. But once they are integrated, we then have control over our movements. We now our arms don't automatically go into that fencer position when we turn our head. We have that dissociation between our different body parts. And as those primitive reflexes are integrating throughout infancy and toddlerhood, the child grows and develops, hits developmental milestones, and starts to be able to access the higher level brain cognition processes. Now, primitive reflexes get stuck in the body for some reason, if they don't integrate, we call them retained primitive reflexes. And what happens is then it causes the brain and the body to get stuck at that lower level. They don't have control over their body movements. They don't have control over their hand-eye coordination. And they're not going to be able to think and problem solve and have those higher level cognitive processes happen because they're stuck in that lower brain stem level of their body from their primitive reflexes being stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. For example, with the ATNR, if it was retained, imagine how a child could not function if every time they turned their head to one side, their arms followed wherever their eyes were looking, right? So you can't hold your paper down at school and write and look up at the board. That might be like TLR or something, right? Like some other one. But anyway, we don't need to go into the nitty-gritty here and show how much I don't know about this topic. But it's basically, the gist of it is that there are things that can elicit these reflexes if they are retained in older kids, which make it very difficult to have control over your movements and your thinking, really, because if your body isn't cooperating with what you want it to do, it can be really challenging for a kid in all the functional things that we work
So
on.
going back towards our function versus retained primitive reflexes, that's where it's important to have that clinical observation ability, to be able to have a checklist that you can give to the parent and say, fill this out so we can identify what your functional deficits are as it relates to primitive reflexes. So you can get an idea before you even test a kid. Yeah, we're really struggling with a couple of areas of the ATNR, so let's test it and see if it's possibly retained, or maybe there aren't any checks on the ATNR, but we're still showing some of those retention signs. And that's, I think, what's so important to think about is it doesn't necessarily, the reflexes don't necessarily need to be addressed if they're not impacting function. There's so many factors that go into primitive reflexes that just because you do a
Right.
physical test, whether it's active or passive, and it's showing up that the reflex is retained, if it's not impacting function, then it's probably not impacting function, and that's okay. And I think
Right.
sometimes people get their panties in a wad looking for, oh, the moral reflex was slightly retained and we need to really work on this, but it's not actually impacting their function. And we don't want to waste our time if we're not seeing clinical
Right.
challenges. Let's focus on if there is underlying trauma or if they're feeling unsafe or if there's underlying sensory challenges. Because if you think about that great visual, the pyramid of learning, sensory and primitive reflexes are the base of that foundational pyramid, right? Without
Yeah.
accurate primitive reflex maturation and sensory processing skills, then those higher level skills, like Jessica mentioned, aren't necessarily going to build as efficiently as possible. And a big component of the reflex integration is ocular motor skills. Oftentimes, when kids have
Mhm.
retained TLRs and STNRs and ATNRs, their ocular motor skills aren't working efficiently. Their eyes aren't working in coordinated movements together. So they're struggling to copy from the board and read and write. They're getting diagnosed with dyslexia. They're getting diagnosed with ATNR or with
ADHD.
ADHD. Thank you. So there's
Yeah.
all of these components that we have to just peel the layers of the onion back to see what is the actual problem here, if there is a problem with the reflex integration.
Yeah. I want to quick tell people if people are feeling like, wow, I'm sure there's people that are going to listen to this who maybe don't even know about this topic at all. But I know you guys you have a course, right?
We do.
Yes.
For therapists or for parents. I know you guys have different levels. So if people go to harkla.co, is that the
Yep.
website?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you want more like an actual course and like the checklists and things to use and how to assess and how to treat all of this, go to harkla.co and get their course. And then you can get into the nitty gritty details and have all the resources, right? I've actually thought about I do have some therapists who see individual kids in my practice, but we do most of our services in groups. So this might get us into talking about like some of the things we could do in groups that would maybe we're not in a place like I have all my systems in place in my business. We are not in a place where like any kid that comes into a group is going to get individualized primitive reflex testing. Like that's not something I intend to do, but I wonder if there are ideas you guys have for ones that activities or exercises that we could do in a group maybe that would be helpful for any child who might have retained primitive reflexes that are popular ones that are often retained. I don't know if there's ones that are more than others, but do you know what I'm saying? Like ideas for exercises we could do in a small group or individual
Yep.
session.
Well, first, I think it's important to note that the primitive reflex exercises and activities can be beneficial for everyone, including adults. Because even
Yeah.
if your primitive reflexes are not functionally impacting you, these exercises and activities still focus on building strength and coordination throughout the body. So that's important.
Hmm.
My go to, especially with a group, would be yoga and having just a really simple yoga flow to follow that focuses
Okay.
on like the Superman, cat cow, cobra to
Uh-huh.
down dog, and then child's pose. It could be a super simple yoga flow, and that's going to work on a lot of sensory processing as well. The kids are going to get a lot of proprioceptive input by being on the ground. They're going to get a lot of vestibular input from the head position changes, and they're going to be moving and coordinating their body, which is great for the brain and body connection. And then incorporate the
Yeah.
breathing into it, right? So you move into a new pose and you do a deep breath before you go into the next pose, right? So you're also going to be working on a lot of self regulation and interoceptive processing as well.
Yeah, the breathing is so key too. As you said, yoga, I was thinking, gosh, the simplest things, like we forget how therapeutic they can
Yes.
be.
Yes.
I'm doing a PT, I'm doing a group, a PT that runs a group program. I'm doing her program for people. I'm not communicating that. I'm doing a program with a physical therapist right now who runs a group online program for people who have scoliosis. So it's mostly Pilates based. And I am amazed with how much time she spends on breathing in every class. I just never knew how important breathing was for my rib cage and my back. I just don't think about it. So it's important for our kids too. And I often don't think about it with kids. So
I could go on a
good
whole nother tangent about
I
breathing,
know.
right.
how so many of our kids are shallow breathers and they're just constantly all day long. They're
Yeah.
never getting a deep, full breath and filling up their lungs and their belly all the way. Like it almost never happens. And so it is something that as
Yeah.
therapists, we can start including into our sessions.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too. Yoga, my go-to is always crawling, just because crawling naturally integrates the STNR, helps with the TLR, the ATNR as well, and the Palmer, all of the things. So I'm like, get down on the floor. I wrote a book about crawling because I'm like, I love crawling. I want everyone, I want kids, I want adults, I want pregnant people to just get on the floor and crawl
Yeah.
all day long.
Yes. And honestly,
Yeah, well, they took it. The American Academy of Pediatrics just removed it from the developmental
Yeah.
list of
It's,
the developmental sequence or whatever for kids. I know that OTs everywhere and PTs were
it's
like,
outrageous.
"What the?" Just yeah, it's completely mind blowing. It's just so important. That cross lateral is so important
yes, it is.
for development. It just blew for the brain development. It just blew my
No
mind. So
kidding.
we need to form a coup, write
Right?
a big letter of response or something because it's nuts.
Very
Anyways,
nuts.
someone was going to say
Oh,
something. Sorry,
no,
I
that's okay. I was just gonna say you could create a whole activity outside with yoga and crawling and climbing and really incorporate all of these different components to have an amazing therapy session. And this could be OT, PT, speech, mental health. You could
yeah,
address all of those different areas for whatever specialty you're in with being outside doing yoga and crawling.
yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I feel like I saw something on your was it your okay, you'll have to tell me. Just tell me, no, Laura, you're crazy. You're remembering it wrong. But I actually feel like I got this idea from either your Instagram or maybe a podcast of yours that I listened to. When I was with my new employee at her group the other day, they just had a ball out. We were waiting for the other kids to get there. It was a group. And so there were, I think, two little boys there and one of our volunteers, and they were just throwing a ball around. And I was like, you guys, could we do a challenge? And I showed them how to do like a plank position and then push the ball to each other with one hand, like trying to hold yourself up in a plank with one hand while you push the ball to each other with the other hand.
Yes.
One of them was not going for it, but the other one gave it a try. And it was like, that to me was like a much more challenging activity than just standing and kicking or throwing the ball, right? You're getting their head in a different position, you're getting some upper body strengthening. So I think as therapists, we need to think a little bit about the yes, there's therapeutic value, but also if a kid can be challenged a little bit more, like I could tell they were both, it was easy. It was no big deal, which is fine. It was just we're just hanging out before everybody got there. But was that from am I remembering that from you guys?
We have done that one before.
We have, so
Yeah.
it could be,
I don't
yeah.
know.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not crazy then. Thank you
I think
for verifying that I'm not crazy. No?
I think that activity might actually be in the course as one of the functional activities to
So
address
it
a
probably was
permanent
in like an
reflex.
Instagram video
It
then.
could have been,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but that's
That or maybe because I think I listened to the podcast episode too, that was the webinar
oh,
where you
yeah.
guys were
Oh,
introducing the course, where you talked a little bit. So maybe it's
yeah. It
from
could have
that. I
been.
can't
Yeah.
remember. But anyway, it was great. I
That
thought
is
it was a really
cool.
great podcast slash I listened to it, but I guess there's a video somewhere maybe of it. I don't know. But yeah, okay. So yoga, plank position with the ball. What else did we
Oh,
say? Crawling.
Crawling.
Are there any other ones that are like big must do? These are great kind of activities.
I'm going along with the ball activity. I love like twisting and passing a ball back and forth and playing with the eyes, and
Yes.
then same going up and over and watching their body. Do their eyes actually go up over their head, or do they maintain their head in a neutral position when they're like going up and down? That tells us a lot about them. So that's always one of my go-tos as well, is to get the head into different positions and see what happens.
Yes, so you're bringing up something else I tried to do with the kids the other day. So we were making ice cream in an ice cream ball, which is a super fun. It is so fun. You can find it on Amazon. Just type in ice cream ball to make ice cream or something and you'll find it. But you put the heavy cream and the rock salt in the outside of the thing and it has this container and you put the heavy cream and we used honey in ours.
Mm.
Use a lot of honey if you do. Ours did not have enough honey in it. Our honey was a little crystallized, and so our ice cream ended up being like butter. But anyway, I've made ice cream before in the ice cream ball, and it's amazing. But the motivating thing is that the children have to roll the ball for at least 25 minutes to get the ice cream.
Wow.
So if you have a group of kids, you can't kick it because it's more delicate than that. So what I was trying to get the kids to do, we were rolling it a lot, like just sitting on the ground rolling it or maybe gently rolling it with our feet to each other. But I wanted to change it up because we had a couple of kids not interested. They were like, this is boring, whatever. And they were like going over to play with sticks, which was fine and therapeutic as well. But I wanted to get them back in. And so I was trying to have them like stand in a line and one pass over and then one go under their legs. And I'm like now thinking, did they have primitive reflex? Because they were like, oh, we're not having it. As soon as the first kid put it over his head and I put it under, the rest of the line disintegrated. The next three kids were like, we're not doing
Oh,
this.
Wow.
It's interesting, right? It's really interesting to see because that would seemingly be something most kids, I think, would think that was fun, pass it up and over. But I do wonder, it's things like that now. My brain is going to be going like, like I do wonder because it could be that we just think they're not motivated or they don't want to do it. But if you take a primitive reflex or even a sensory integration stance on it, it could be that they can't or they're having a hard time doing it. And so they disengage, right? I'm glad to know I was doing some things
I love
Yeah,
that. I'm
keep
gonna go
doing
that
it.
were supporting.
Keep doing it. Yes. I was also thinking too,
Yeah.
oftentimes these kids don't know how, right? They struggle with motor planning, which can be related back to
Yeah.
primitive reflexes. So they watch somebody else do a new motor task and they also have decreased self-confidence because that things are hard for them. And so they watch somebody do
Yeah.
a new motor task and they immediately go to, nope, that's too hard. I don't know how to do it. I'm not even going to try because this is all internal that they're saying, because I know it'll be too
Sure.
hard for me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, as therapists, we have to figure out how can we get these kids engaged in these novel motor planning activities to address all of these areas, but also to just increase their self-confidence in their own abilities to do new things.
Mhm. Yeah. It does help when other kids are there, like the one with the plank position. With the one kid doing it who was good friends with the other kid, he actually was like, "Oh, you're gonna do it?" Like I think having the kids modeling and having group sessions where kids are modeling different things is good. It gets some buy-in besides like a therapist, like adult person doing
Totally.
it. Yeah. Let's do a little wrap up. Do you guys want to? I already promoted your course for
I
you. Do you
did.
guys
Thank you.
anything like feel free? I mean, I want you to share with people what do you have available. So your podcast is All Things Sensory. You do it weekly. It's amazing. Everyone should go subscribe to it. It's so great. That is the free thing you have, but I know you guys have multiple courses through Harkla
Yeah,
now.
we also have YouTube. That's another free resource if you're a visual person. We
Oh,
do
okay.
YouTube as well. That's Harkla. You can just search Harkla. But yeah, we do have our paid courses. We do have free webinars as well that kind of give you an idea of what the like full course looks like. But we've got early
Mhm.
intervention, we have sensory diets, we have primitive reflexes, and the early intervention course includes primitive reflex integration for that early intervention age range, which we felt like was
Okay.
missing from so many courses. And there's just this big gap of we don't necessarily work on and integrate and test for primitive reflexes until 4, 5, 6 years old. So what do we do with our early intervention kiddos who are struggling?
Yeah.
So how can we help facilitate integration? So we cover that a lot in our course as well, but I definitely would start there.
We also have a course that's focused on the classroom. It's improving focus and behavior in the classroom, and it's how to use sensory strategies for the classroom for all students, but also how to individualize sensory strategies for students who might need a little bit more. And it's geared towards educators and teachers, as well as school-based
Great.
therapists.
Great. I love it. Because I feel like that's such a wonderful resource because I worked in schools for almost 10 years in my career. And oh my gosh, the workload in a school setting is just a
Yeah.
lot. So if you're making it easier for therapists to be able to, or for teachers to be able to do things without the therapist there, even, yeah, that's awesome.
Trying.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So all of our
Yeah. Okay.
info is on our website, harkla.co.
Okay. Yeah. HARKLA.co.
Yes.
So everybody can find you guys there and find you on YouTube, and you're on Instagram too. Yes. At what is it? At All Things Century or at Harkla? What's
Both.
the
We have at All Things Sensory podcast, and we have Harkla_family because we're a family.
Okay, great. I love it. Thank you so much for coming. I love talking to you guys, and I just love the work you're doing. I'm so you're like such a light in the OT profession, and I'm so thankful for you guys and what you do for everyone. So thanks for being
Thank
here.
you so much.
I was about to publish this episode and realized I had not mentioned in the episode that Contigo, my nature-based therapy certification and mentoring program, is now open for enrollment. We only open enrollment 3 times a year for this program. You get lifetime access when you join, and we give you everything that you need, the mentoring, the support, the content, the training, the resources, in order to become an expert nature-based pediatric therapist. So if you are interested, you can go to contigoapproach.com and get all of the information there. We are open until April 30th for a May cohort. We will have our meetings on Zoom to process the learning that we're doing together in the month of May for 4 consecutive weeks in the month of May. And if you have taken Contigo before, you're welcome to join us as well. So I'll see you guys inside. If you want to enroll, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you may have. My email is laura@therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com. See you soon. Wait a second. Don't go yet. Do you want 120 ways that you can take your pediatric therapy work outdoors into nature? I wrote the free big, huge list of nature-based therapy activities just for you. The Big Huge List will give you quick ideas for nature-based sessions. In the Big Huge List, there are activities for gross motor, fine motor, visual perceptual, executive function, balance, group collaboration and team building, social, emotional, and self-regulation skills, as well as speech and language, and a whole section just for swing activities. So go on and get your free Big Huge List so you can get started taking kids outdoors or have some new ideas if you've been doing this a while. You can download your free copy at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com/list. So until next time, get outside, connect, reflect, and enjoy therapy in the great outdoors.